Okay, on to Genesis chapter 7. This is the crescendo chapter. In 2 Peter, Peter says that God isn't slack concerning his promises, but he's long suffering, not willing that any should perish. So chapter 7, we have this timeline where God meets with Noah at 500 years old, but God brings the flood 100 years later. So Noah is 600 years old when the flood happens. Now there are a few key verses in chapter 7 we want to look at. God says in verse 4, I will destroy all living things throughout the whole world. So question 1, is it a worldwide flood? Is it a local flood? If it's not a worldwide flood, people have places to flee to and avoid it. If it is a worldwide flood, then all living things will be destroyed, which is God's intention. Because, chapter 6, the thoughts and intents of the heart of all mankind was continually evil. Great wickedness across the whole earth. So much so that God was grieved that he made man even, which is incredible to read that. So now God is intent on destroying the world by a flood. No living thing on the earth is going to survive this, and that's what we read in chapter 7, verse 4. That I'm going to destroy all, and nothing will survive this. Nothing will survive it. The only things that survive are those that are in the ark. And Noah is in the process of building the ark. He's gotten to that point where God says, now it's time, and animals begin arriving, male and female. He's given certain instructions. Noah and his family enter the ark. And it's interesting that it says that Noah did everything that God commanded him to do. He didn't hesitate on it. He just did it. He trusted. It says in Hebrews he was a preacher of righteousness, but his preaching fell on deaf ears because no one else joined him. So they entered the ark. All the animals are there, and there in verse 16 it says that the Lord shut them in. So the Lord sealed it, shut them in, and protected them. And then they're all in the ark, and guess what? 7 days they had to wait, no rain. 7 days until it began to rain. When it began to rain, can you imagine being in the ark, waiting 7 days for it to actually begin to happen? But God told them in advance, this is what I'm going to do. It's going to be a 7-day window. And then the rains will happen. And then it says in verse 11, it's a very poignant verse actually, Genesis 7:11, all the fountains of the deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. So if in fact, as a lot of theologians surmise, there was a giant water canopy that protected the earth from UV rays, but it was almost like a tropical environment, and there were underwater springs that provided fresh water, but there were no oceans necessarily. Now all of a sudden you see this dramatic geologic change where the fountains of the deep are changed, the clouds are gone, the water vapor, the water canopy just dumps down, and now all this water has to flow somewhere. And that's what you have with Genesis. So the term is interesting. For 40 days it rained, 40 days, 40 nights. And then it says the waters prevailed over the earth. 4 different times it says the waters prevailed for a period of 150 days. So they were in the ark possibly up to almost 200 days even, in fact. So if you just run the math through this chapter, in verse 21, all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, cattle, beasts, every creeping thing, and every man. So that's chapter 7, quite a sobering and poignant chapter. And we'll talk to you later.